Hi everyone, welcome back to the Purpose Pro podcast. This podcast is all about discussing different topics in the area of mental health, specifically regarding high school students, in order to shine a light and bring awareness to topics that may not be widely talked about. For those who are new, my name is Anya Prosla, and I'm a junior in high school, and my goal is to enhance our understanding of teenage mental health. Today, I will be interviewing Dr. Helen Su, who is the Director of Outreach, Asian American Specialist, and a lecturer at Stanford University. She has served as the past president of the Asian American Psychological Association. In addition to her role at Stanford, she serves as the president for the American Psychological Association for Division 45. One of her many specialties is in teen and young adult psychology, mental health, and suicide prevention. So since today is Valentine's Day, the day that oftentimes signifies love between two individuals, we will be discussing various ways to cope with the breakup. Seems pretty ironic that we are talking about breakups on a day that is supposed to be full of love, joy, and gifts. But let's face it, the amount of breakups that happen right around today is through the roof. So if you are one of these individuals that went through the tragedy of a breakup, or are picking up the pieces after getting broken up with recently, you may want to tune in for this one. So grab a seat, maybe some comfort food while you're at it, and enjoy listening as we break down tips on how to cope with the breakup. So first of all, welcome, Dr. Sue. It's such a pleasure to have you on my podcast. I just wanted to lead with not just happy Valentine's Day, but also a slightly belated happy birthday as well. I had a chance to listen to several of your videos, one of which, by the way, I dropped to follow because I absolutely love your videos and how they're styled, and they grab my attention the whole time. And if I'm being honest, I usually get pretty distracted when watching videos that are longer than about 2 minutes. And yes, I know that's ironic coming from someone who does podcasts, but your episodes kept me focused and I gained a lot from them. So today I wanted to discuss one of your videos you made, which is the one talking about breaking up and how to cope with it.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. And yes, I know that longer than even 30 seconds now is apparently long form. But I am always happy to talk about just ways that we can build our skills to protect our mental health, because it's impossible to get through life without rough seasons and tough things like breakups.
So I took the opportunity to watch the video you made regarding tips on how to cope with the breakup. And I had one question on the techniques you shared, which was about grabbing a notebook, sitting down, putting pen to paper to jot things down, such as the good things that happened in the relationship and also all the reasons it didn't work. So I feel like this requires a lot of reflecting, evaluating, time, and patience from a person in order to do so. And those skill sets are exactly what teenagers lack. And when teenagers are dating and after their breakup, most of them tend to be angry and full of rage rather than being upset at first. So if anger is the first stage, would you still recommend journaling as a tool? And if not, what would you recommend as an alternative?
Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of research that basically shows some kind of expression helps us to moderate our emotions in a constructive way. And so writing, there's a ton of research, especially about writing. But if that's not your thing, people create music, they do voice memos, you can just, the point is the worst thing to do is like ruminate in your head. That tends to be like really not constructive and just increase whatever like difficult feelings we have. So I think these days there are a lot of people who do voice memos. And when we talk about writing too, I don't mean at this stage, like say early in your breakup, like, oh, write this really deep analysis. It's more like random thoughts, don't have an editor, just jot it down. You're really just trying to express and record. Like analysis can come later. And in fact, sometimes when we as therapists assign like writing things to people, we purposely give people short stimulus, like write about this one thing, or we give time limits. Like you literally have 5 minutes to write about this one thing. And the reason for that is when you have to do almost like a sprint writing, you don't get into the inner editor, you don't try to analyze, you're just expressing, and that really helps. And that's for any emotion, including anger, that I do think we don't know enough about healthy ways to just actually honor when we're angry. And then once we're done expressing, we're in a better state to actually think about analyzing or understanding, or what can I learn from this?
Okay, so basically it's having that anger stage, and then after recovering from that anger stage is when you start to analyze and start to dig deeper than those angry rage feelings that one probably has.
Yeah, like it's important to express our feelings in a way that is as constructive as possible, but that, it's usually all mixed up at once, like disappointment, maybe embarrassment, maybe anger, and being sad. And so giving some space to express those things without um, too much analysis or editing early on. And also, I often advise people try to get away from, if you notice you have, I call them meta emotions, so feelings about your feelings, like, oh, I'm so embarrassed that I'm mad, or
Mhm.
I'm mad at myself that I still miss this person or something. It's like, okay, the job is to like understand and experience our emotions and learn from them. When we start analyzing them, interpreting them, having feelings about our feelings, we just make everything messier and even harder.
Okay, so trying to just stick to the surface feelings, or when do you know it's like a good time to start digging deeper down into the feelings? Because at one point you're gonna start feeling feelings about those feelings. So
Hmm.
yeah.
It's trying not to judge the feelings, right? Just be and notice, like, what is this? And so some people do feeling like little charts, or again, little voice memos through the day, and be like, oh, wow, like maybe in the morning I felt really sad, or hopeful, but then you know what, later by afternoon I was really mad. And that's fine, right? And kind of not acknowledging all that and noting it, and we can think about it later, like, oh, is there a pattern, or is there something about this that is useful information? But trying to, like, I would say, kind of picturing like a stop sign or something, if we notice we're getting into that, having judgments and judgy feelings, which cause more feelings about my feelings,
Yeah.
tends to just complicate things in a way that's not helpful.
Okay, got it. Okay, so also in the same video, you mentioned working on yourself and focusing on your needs because some of those needs can't be filled by another person. They have to be done by you. So, however, in order to work on yourself, you may have to start really putting yourself out there by going out with new people or trying a hobby and all that. But teenagers after a breakup, more often than not, don't have that willpower to go out and try new things. And sometimes they tend to isolate themselves at home and dwell in their own sorrow, which isn't really the best thing to do.
Mhm.
So, how can one push and motivate themselves to want to fill these gaps rather than feeling like they have to, or they maybe just not doing it at all?
Yeah. I think there is a little bit of time you give yourself of like, it's okay to grieve something that is like disappointing or loss. So allowing a little bit of time for that. But then it's like, okay, we know that if you're feeling stuck in an emotion or situation, even if you're not 100% sure, like what is the right thing to do, I would say when you're stuck, you do know you need to try something new. Um, but it can be really small. I think sometimes we set ourselves up for failure because we set like a goal that seems too vague or too big. And then it's really hard to reach it. Like, I'll be a new person. It's like, what does that mean? And I always say, you don't have to be a new person. You're fine the way you are. Just keep growing who you are. So tiny steps is one thing. There's a professor at Stanford. He has a project called, I think it's Tiny Habits. And there's a book and there's free guides online, and really talks about like the tiniest steps. Um, and sometimes accountability partners help so much, right? Like my friends are going to make sure I don't stay home and just like wallow.
Yeah.
I've, promised like I'm going to take my sister somewhere today and get out of the house. So little tiny things like that, but they do add up. I've had
Mhm.
students who, we set what seemed like a manageable specific goal. Like, fine, I will try one new thing per week. And it could be as small as I'm going to eat lunch at a different place, or I'm going to visit one club or one place I don't usually go. And it's also easy to say it's just an experiment. Like, I'm visiting, I'm not committing, and just
Okay, so
tweaking
it's
things
something
out.
that builds up.
Yeah. So small steps, actually, it's kind of like if you've ever done a sport or played a musical instrument, a lot of really boring little tiny drills really do add up over the long run.
Mm, okay. Yeah, I agree. I feel like starting slow and taking your time with it, and also giving yourself like that cushion of maybe like 3 to 4 days to like have like a little bit of sadness, but then knowing when to bounce back. Yeah, I feel like
Hmm.
that's like how it's supposed to go. So, in your video, you also talked about how it's what it's like getting back together with a partner and assessing if one is really ready to try again. However, sometimes relationships can break people and spawn challenges like maybe trust issues, commitment issues, communication problems, and all that. So, how does one know when they have really moved on and are emotionally ready to give relationships and love overall another chance?
Hmm. I mean, there's not an easy answer because everybody's a little different, and you don't have to be 100% like, emotionally like perfect or healthy to find love or affection, right? I think sometimes people think that, and if that were true, probably hardly any of us would ever find someone. But there is a place of hopefully you also have some friends or family that can provide you some perspective too, that when you check yourself,
Mhm,
right, that they can have some feedback, people who really know you well, and you should take that seriously. And then for yourself, it's like running through some questions for yourself about, what are my real motivations? How am I noticing a lot of reactions and triggers to things emotionally, which, that happens a lot for some of us, especially depending on people's own histories. But then do
mhm,
I have some good skills? Have I come up with skills to deal with things that I'm not relying on like another person to fill those? Um, and really sometimes deeply looking at like, what is the source of these feelings? That's where I say like learning to sit with uncomfy feelings is a really important skill. We always want to like avoid or push away or distract, which is totally understandable. But our feelings have data, and they are there to tell us really important things.
mhm.
Like I've had someone say, "Oh my gosh, I feel so bad. I feel so bad. I feel so bad. I really miss him. I wish we could get back together." But when we really sat with it, it was like, it's not like this person treated me that great, or I was like so actually crazy about them, but I am feeling anxious and scared. I miss being in a relationship. So it
Yeah.
wasn't so much about this person, but it was about what does it mean to me to not be in a relationship and the anxiety that brings, and then dealing with that.
So moreover, the idea of being in a relationship rather than being in the relationship with that person.
Sometimes,
Mhm,
yeah. It's like sometimes someone doesn't want to be friends with us anymore, doesn't want to date anymore. And it always hurts and feels bad to feel rejected. Even if you really think about it, it's like, well, it's actually not that person that was that important, but it still can be hurtful. And so holding the complexity of those kind of things.
okay. And you were mentioning about reassessing yourself and asking yourself questions. But so I have this one friend, and she when she was going through a breakup, we would ask her if she's okay, and clearly she wasn't okay. She wasn't moving on, but she would continuously tell herself that she's moving on and she's like going to be okay, and she doesn't want to go back. But truly, like deeply, she does. And like, how do you put those like thoughts aside of what you actually feel and what you want yourself to feel?
Hmm. It's also something that it's helpful to process again by writing or talking to someone you trust, whether it's friends or like in therapy. I think that's what a lot of people do because therapy is confidential in a way that no other relationship is. If you have a good relationship with a therapist, a lot of people really dissect the feelings in there that they maybe have a hard time admitting to other people or even to themselves.
Mhm,
And a lot of what we do is really normalize how like it's okay to have conflictual feelings. Right. Like to logically know, like, oh, this is not a healthy thing and I should move on, but to still be grieving
mhm,
and still have hopes. And then sort out how do we actually live with these, like what feels conflictual, but is actually pretty normal.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think we all sometimes have to ask ourselves, like, am I doing too much distraction? Am I doing too much avoidance? Again, am I able to actually be present with what I'm really feeling? That is a real life skill that sounds like the easiest thing in the whole world, but it's super hard, right? I mean, that's why there are like retreats and classes and teachers about like mindfulness.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's actually something that anybody can practice in very small steps.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
So after moving on, sometimes people jump right into another relationship because they crave that attention from like a warm physical body being there, and that person is commonly called the rebound. So how do you tell when you're really moving on and starting something meaningful with someone new and not just rebounding into another bad relationship? So basically, in other words, how do we spot that rebound?
I always say you should always feel like you are learning and evolving in some way. I think one of the most problematic signs is I've had many people tell me, both clients and in my personal life, oh, like this always happens, right? Like this kind of pattern, say with someone I'm dating. It's like, well, that's a sign then that there's something else that you should really be working on.
Mhm.
Um, and frankly, my husband and I joke about it that like everybody assumed he was a rebound because it was, but so like, how do you know what's different, right? And it's like, well, the quality of the relationship is different. Is the quality of the communication healthier? Do I feel like I can really be myself? Do I feel like we are bringing out like positive things in each other? All these things rather than like, oh, this is a familiar pattern. Because the fear is that whatever was maybe sometimes problematic, maybe in our family of origin or in our past relationship, even if it wasn't the healthiest thing, sometimes we just gravitate to that because it's so familiar.
So more of looking at what's different in the relationship rather than the similar things that happened in the past relationship and comparing it to the current one.
Yeah. And, how authentic can you really be there and what really feels additive when you're with somebody? It should feel like you are both, bringing out good things in each other, not like constantly, but overall net positive.
Hmm.
Anyone who wants to know a lot about relationships can go look at the Gottman website.
Uh-huh.
John and Julie Gottman have spent like 30 something years analyzing videos of couples fighting and
Oh, wow.
breaking down like every single line of how do people make repairs
Hmm.
in a healthy way when they have disagreements, or how do people really just go off the rails in unhealthy ways and they can't get over their conflicts. So it's really interesting stuff. But one of the net things they just say is if your positive interactions ratio outnumber the negative ones by a good amount, you're in a pretty good place, even if you
Okay.
do fight sometimes.
All right. So sometimes some relationships, like I know a few of my friends that have dated their partners for like maybe 2 to 3 years, where they feel bonded to their partner or soul tied to whomever they're dating. But after a breakup, how does someone accept that the fact that that era of their life with that special someone is essentially over? It's easy to know that it's gone and it's not there anymore, like a part of your body, but much harder to accept the fact that it's really done. So how would someone go about more of accepting it rather than just simply knowing that it's over?
Hmm. Well, we only get through things by living them,
Hmm. Yeah.
So it is. I think when someone's really going over like grieving or missing someone, like it is the tiny steps, right? Like we go through this day by day. Um, and I do think that's what's really hard when you're young is that you don't have the experience of like, okay, I've been through this before, right? And
Yeah.
we got through it. So it's really hard to have that confidence that like someone that was the center of my life for 2 years might actually be someone that I would live a really full, happy life without. It's hard to imagine or picture because you haven't experienced it. But the only way we do is by doing. And so if that's day by day and continuing to kind of grow other parts of your life. And again, we sort of sometimes have to grieve and wish somebody well, but know that we aren't meant to move on, whether that's romantic or it is like a friend. And it doesn't mean I think we also get in trouble when we interpret things like, oh, if we didn't stay together forever, it's a failure. And I don't think so. I think sometimes it can be a positive thing, and maybe we were good for each other for a while, but we've grown apart or we have different values, and that's okay.
Mhm. So
Um,
kind
so
of, yeah. Okay.
it's sort of like you start growing the other part of your life that doesn't have this person, and eventually that part will get bigger than the time you did have with this person, and it will get more and more like easy, and you get more and more full with other things that maybe right now you can't picture yet.
Mhm. All right. So, many people have like a bunch of different ways to cope and like heal from a breakup. So some people jump into another relationship, like with the rebounding. Others like completely go in self-isolation. They stay home, they stay in their rooms, and then maybe just binge watch, sorry, Netflix, or distract themselves by having an extremely packed schedule, ultimately overworking their mind and their body. So, what have you found to be the best methods for people to cope and move on?
Hmm. I mean, the one word I use the most about most things in life is this idea of modulation and moderation, right? That when we get to extremes, it's usually not the best. So to totally collapse and isolate, okay, that's really not very healthy. But to go out there constantly and overwork and hyper focus on that, like also not healthy, So can we look at this idea of balance, like little bits of different things? And it doesn't have to be rigid schedule, like, okay, I now must do all these things these days, like roughly. So, for example, like, oh, I should go see my friends or I should exercise. You don't have to be on some kind of super strict schedule, but if it's like roughly this many times per week, that seems like a good balance for me and I feel pretty good. And if I notice that I haven't gone out in like 3 weeks, or I've like dropped my exercise time to like, 10% of what it used to be, like, okay, I'm really out of balance. Um, and that's how it is with most things, right? Some
Mhm.
of us stop sleeping when we're like stressed or
Yeah.
sad, and others oversleep and hypersomnia. And so both of those extremes are signs that like, oh, I'm really not balancing how I'm taking care of myself. And again, if that goes on for too long, who can I find to help me modulate if I'm struggling?
Mhm. So usually during that 1 week buffer that you get after the breakup, I think the one thing that you're constantly thinking about is the relationship. So after breaking up, is it better to remember and remind yourself of the good or the bad memories in order to move on? Because if someone remembers the bad memories, they may see the negatives more of the relationship and learn to move on faster because they'll know all the reasons why it didn't work out. But if they choose to cherish the good, would that be better or would it be not as helpful?
Yeah, there's a lot of experts who advise in the early phase, like making sure you do remind yourself of like why this decision came to not be together and why it's
Mhm.
not gonna work out. Um, it's important to remember that rather than like romanticize the greatest hits of like, oh, these were like the 10 best dates, but like, yeah, but then let's talk about all the times this person was maybe inconsiderate or has really different values than you do. So starting out, it's very helpful to remind ourselves like, yeah, it's hard. Maybe that feeling of like so close, but so far. Like, oh,
Mhm.
these things were great, but reminding ourselves like, yes, and these were the reasons that we could not like get around or we would not be good partners. Um, and I don't think it's bad till maybe later just be able to acknowledge like, okay, like maybe at that phase of my life, we did have some good times and I learned some things. Right. I'm absolutely not someone, I think it's actually not a very good sign when people are like, oh, I hate all my exes. It's like,
Yeah.
I feel like we can appreciate our time with someone and not necessarily see it as a failure, but then also clearly know that like I absolutely can't see this person being a healthy part of my growth in the future.
Mhm. So kind of knowing like the limit of cherishing it and then also the limit of thinking bad upon it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this next question is, I feel like it's an important question. So many people come with baggage such as trust and communication issues from their past relationships. So rather than focusing on the one side of the relationship, with the more baggage, how can a potential partner who has less baggage manage handling and coping with their partner's baggage?
Mhm. Well, there's a joke we say, the saying is that, especially as you get older, there's nobody without baggage. You just look for bags that maybe match yours a little bit.
I like that.
Yeah. Um, and what do we mean by baggage? Because a lot of our deficits and relationship problems are actually things that are learnable skills.
Mhm,
So not to see yourself or your partner as like, well, this is just, a deficit and that's that. Um, there's a lot of skills we can still build to be better, to learn to communicate better, um, to learn to manage our own emotions better, to have more empathy and understanding for other people better. So there's a lot we can work with. And it does help to check in often. Again, and if you have a trusted source like a family or friends, or even reading up from experts about like, is this normal? Is this unhealthy or not?
mhm.
Sometimes it's super helpful because if you haven't had a lot of dating history because you're young, it's hard to know.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do need someone to say, actually, this part seems really unhealthy and maybe seems like this person should see a professional because it's not something a partner can do for them.
Mhm.
Versus maybe this other thing is something the two of you could work on communicating and checking in on.
So to what extent would you know to start looking at professional help rather than going back and forth with your partner, trying to figure out between you two?
Yeah. I think these days, the good news is there is a lot of free basic information available online that you could explore. Um, and then again, if you have someone that you trust to ask for some advice. So like at Stanford, a lot of times students will come. We offer these sessions called Let's Talk, which are just
Mhm.
sort of ask anything sessions. And so a lot of students will just come and ask things like, is this something that I should talk to a counselor about? Or
Okay.
is there a resource that you would recommend to me or to us to read up more about something? Is this normal? Is this healthy? That
Mhm.
if you have someone like that, whether it's a counselor, again, a family member or a friend, it's helpful. And yes, definitely when you read online, there's a lot of great info now, but make sure you're reading from reputable sources.
Mhm.
Because there is a big problem with like random influencers saying things that
Yeah.
aren't actually based in facts. So there's great info now that is available on for free, but make sure it's from, a good source.
So getting like another perspective should help a lot.
Yeah. Just knowing that, like, again, you're young and you don't have a lot of experience with this. So being able to get that feedback, like a lot of our students will ask us, or they'll ask, like, say, the residence dean at the dorm they're living in, and sometimes, yeah, we've had to give people advice like, it's really great you're trying to be such a good partner or such a good friend, but this particular thing that is going on with your friend, maybe their family trauma history or past relationship history, like it's crossing a line that they really should seek professional help. And here's the supportive things you can do as a good friend or partner. But then here's
Mhm.
the other things that like you really can't take on.
All right. Okay. So on that note, I wanted to close out today's session and ask you these last three questions. So for the first one is, can you provide your perspective on the age-old question of whether it is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all?
Mhm. My perspective is that you have to live. And so if you've noticed a theme that I don't think avoidance of life is a really reasonable or helpful way to get through life. Like basically, you have to experience things and you do learn from them. And you miss out on a lot if you don't just put yourself
That's
there.
true.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's important too to just grow yourself as a person because we do need those hardships in life to keep growing. So
Yeah,
yeah.
there's no such thing as a life without any pain or
Mhm.
sadness or loss. So not to be so
Yeah.
afraid of that.
Yeah, there's no perfect life.
Yeah.
Also, if you don't mind me asking, what are your plans for Valentine's Day?
Literally just making pasta at home and going to a workout, but we had already gone hiking in Muir Woods this last weekend, which was sort of what we like to do.
Oh, that's so fun. I'm
Mhm.
glad you had to get there. And do you have any oh my gosh. Do you have any final pearls of wisdom or advice for teenage and adult listeners who may be seeking love or maybe in a loving relationship or those who may be recovering from love?
Hmm. It's a big question, and it's not a small one. The Surgeon General of the US has said that like loneliness is like a public health problem in this country right now, like nationwide. So it's a big deal. And we all long for connection. It's hugely influential mentally and physically. I think, like I just said, you have to really experience things and not judge them, but really grow. The only way we build these skills and our tolerance is by doing. And the other thing is to remember that love exists in a lot of different ways and spaces. So I'll share that when I was a little girl, I was drawing all these pictures of couples together, and I was very like Disney brainwashed, and I was drawing all these like women in big dresses with princes and whatever. And I remember one day my mom drew with me, and I still remember she's like, there's other kinds of love. Like, look, this is a family and the parents love the kids. And also these people are in the park feeding animals and they love animals.
Uh-huh.
And, there's intergenerational love and friends. And so there really are a lot of different ways that we can bond and connect. I think this cultural fixation on finding romantic love is actually really unrealistic and makes a lot of people feel bad unnecessarily.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Sue. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you on this episode about coping with breakups. You have such a wealth of information, and with your permission, I would love to have you back again if you're up for it. Of
Yes, thank you.
course. And excellent. And for our audience, you may keep up with Dr. Helen Sue on her own YouTube channel called Helen Mental Health, which can be found in our show notes and links below this video. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening in today, and I hope you got a lot from this podcast about all the different ways to cope with a breakup and also all the ways you shouldn't. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me at mentalhealthimage@gmail.com. I hope to see you on the next episode, and till then, take care. Bye.